The influence of Haile Selassie. When we speak of Haile Selassie, Ethiopia's Lion of Judah, we are not merely recounting the story of a monarch. We are tracing the influence of one of the most consequential leaders of the 20th century, a man whose reach extended far beyond the highlands of Ethiopia. His reign shaped not only his nation, but also the consciousness of Africa, the struggle against colonialism, and even the spiritual lives of millions across the ocean. The influence of Haile Selassie is vast, layered, and sometimes contradictory. He was a modernizer and a traditionalist, a reformer and a ruler steeped in imperial power, a king who embodied dignity and resilience, and yet a leader accused by critics of failing to meet the needs of his people. And yet, despite these contradictions, his impact is undeniable. Ethiopia before Selassie. The stage for influence. To understand Selassie's influence, we must first understand the Ethiopia he inherited. Unlike most of Africa, Ethiopia had never been colonized. It had defeated Italy in the famous Battle of Adwa in 1896 under Emperor Menelik II, establishing itself as a symbol of African resistance. This victory carved Ethiopia into the global imagination as proof that European colonialism could be resisted. By the time Haile Selassie rose to power, first as Rastafari Makanan, then as regent, and finally as emperor in 1930, Ethiopia was both proud of its independence and aware of its vulnerability. Surrounded by colonial powers in East Africa, Ethiopia stood as an island of sovereignty in a sea of empire. For Africans under colonial rule, Ethiopia was more than a country, it was hope made real. This context amplified Selassie's influence. He did not only inherit a throne, he inherited the mantle of Africa's independence. A modernizer at home, one of the most direct aspects of Haile Selassie's influence was his modernization of Ethiopia. When he became emperor, Ethiopia was still largely feudal, with limited infrastructure, education, or centralized governance. Selassie sought to change this. He established Ethiopia's first written constitution in 1931, introducing the framework of parliamentary government. Though still under imperial authority, he expanded schools, encouraged Western education, and sought to bring Ethiopia into the global community of nations. Roads, hospitals, and communication systems were developed under his rule. Selassie's influence here lies not just in the institutions he created, but in the vision he projected. Ethiopia would not remain an isolated medieval kingdom. It would stand shoulder to shoulder with modern states. For Ethiopians, he became the symbol of progress, the face of a nation stepping into a new era. The Abyssinian crisis, Selassie on the world stage, but Haile Selassie's influence did not stop at Ethiopia's borders. His defining moment came in 1935 when Mussolini's fascist Italy invaded Ethiopia. The Second Italo-Ethiopian War was a brutal assault, marked by chemical weapons and massacres of civilians. Despite fierce resistance, Ethiopia was overrun and Selassie was forced into exile. It was here, in exile, that Selassie's influence truly exploded. In 1936, he stood before the League of Nations in Geneva, a small African emperor addressing the world's great powers. His speech was searing. He condemned Italy's aggression, decried the use of poison gas, and warned that the failure to stop fascism in Ethiopia would have global consequences. His words proved prophetic. Within years, World War II erupted. But in that moment, Selassie became a voice for the voiceless, not just for Ethiopia, but for all colonized peoples. His image as the defiant Lion of Judah, demanding justice from a world of empires, transformed him into a global figure. This speech cemented his influence as one of the first African leaders to challenge European domination on the world stage. His appeal resonated deeply with Africans and people of African descent worldwide, who saw in him a leader who embodied their struggle. Symbol of African independence, Selassie's return to Ethiopia in 1941, aided by the Allies after Italy's defeat, only amplified his symbolic power. He was no longer just an emperor. He was a living emblem of resistance, survival, and independence. For Africans under colonial rule, Selassie's Ethiopia stood as proof that freedom was possible. When independence movements spread across the continent in the 1950s and 1960s, leaders from Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah to Kenya's Jomo Kenyatta looked to Ethiopia with respect. Addis Ababa, under Selassie, became the capital of Pan-Africanism. In 1963, Selassie hosted the founding of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, the precursor to today's African Union. For him, unity was not optional, it was survival. He believed Africa needed to speak with one voice, to protect sovereignty, and to chart its own destiny. This moment enshrined his influence as not just Ethiopia's emperor, but as Africa's elder statesman. He became a father figure for the Pan-African dream, a leader whose presence at independence celebrations across the continent gave weight and legitimacy to new nations. Influence beyond Africa. The Rastafarian movement, perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Selassie's influence, is spiritual, not political. In the 1930s, in Jamaica, a new religious movement emerged, Rastafarianism. To its followers, Selassie was not just a king, he was divine. They saw in his coronation in 1930, with its biblical titles of King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of Judah, the fulfillment of prophecy. Rastafarians revered him as the returned Messiah, the earthly representative of God, destined to lead black people out of oppression. His image, his speeches, and his connection to Ethiopia, seen as Zion, the Promised Land, became central to their faith. Through Rastafarianism, Selassie's influence spread to music, culture, and identity. Reggae icons like Bob Marley carried his name and message across the globe. Songs like War, based directly on Selassie's own speech to the United Nations, echoed his call for equality and justice. This spiritual influence is extraordinary. Few political leaders transcend into religious figures. Fewer still inspire global cultural movements. Selassie's influence thus extended not just into politics and history, but into the spiritual imagination of millions worldwide. The United Nations and global voice, Selassie's influence also shaped international institutions. After World War II, when the United Nations replaced the failed League of Nations, Selassie again became a voice for the marginalized. He championed collective security, human rights, and decolonization. In 1963, at the UN, he delivered another famous speech. His words were later immortalized by Bob Marley in song. Until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, everywhere is war. This speech crystallized Selassie's influence as a moral voice on global justice. He was not just defending Ethiopia, he was speaking for all oppressed peoples. The contradictions of influence, yet influence is rarely simple. Selassie's legacy is also marked by contradictions. At home, critics accused him of failing to address poverty, famine, and inequality. His modernization often favored elites. In the 1970s, discontent exploded, and he was overthrown by a military coup. His image as a reformer abroad clashed with discontent at home. And yet, even in criticism, his influence remains. The debates about Selassie's failures are part of why people still talk about him today. His life forces us to grapple with the tension between ideals and realities, between vision and execution. The myth of Haile Selassie, when history remembers leaders, it does not always remember them as they were. It remembers them as stories. Over time, the stories grow larger than the person, until the line between history and myth blurs. Few figures of the 20th century embody this process more than Haile Selassie. To some, he was the Lion of Judah, God's chosen emperor of an unbroken Solomonic dynasty. To others, he was the Messiah, the returned Christ, sent to liberate black people from centuries of bondage. To still others, he was the symbol of Africa's dignity, the face of resistance to colonialism. And yet, to his critics, he was a flawed ruler whose grandeur disguised poverty and famine. This tension between man and myth is what keeps Haile Selassie's name alive today. He was both historical figure and legend, flesh and blood, yet larger than life. The biblical lineage and the Lion of Judah, the myth of Haile Selassie begins with lineage. He claimed descent from the Solomonic dynasty, a royal line that traced itself back to King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba. For Ethiopians, this was not simply genealogy, it was divine legitimacy. Ethiopia's national epic, the Kebra Nagast, the Glory of Kings, tells the story of Menelik I, son of Solomon and Sheba, who brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. By linking himself to this line, Selassie was not merely an emperor, he was the inheritor of a sacred legacy stretching back to biblical times, when he was crowned in 1930 as Haile Selassie I, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, Elect of God. The titles themselves echoed scripture. They were not just royal pomp, they were myth-making, weaving Selassie's reign into a cosmic story of divine kingship. This biblical foundation transformed his image. He was not just a political leader. He was a living symbol of God's will on earth, and that myth would soon travel far beyond Ethiopia's borders. The birth of the Rastafarian myth in Jamaica, the coronation of Haile Selassie, sparked a spiritual revolution. For years, preachers influenced by Marcus Garvey had prophesied that a black king would rise in Africa, a messiah who would deliver people of African descent from oppression. When Selassie ascended the throne, bearing biblical titles, many Jamaicans believed the prophecy had been fulfilled. They declared him the returned Christ, the Messiah of the New Age. Thus, the Rastafarian movement was born. For Rastafarians, Selassie was not just Emperor of Ethiopia, he was Jah Rastafari, divine in human form. His very name, Rastafari Makanan, became sacred. They saw Ethiopia as Zion, the promised land, and the West as Babylon, the land of exile and oppression. Through Rastafarianism, Selassie's myth spread globally. Reggae music carried his name to millions. Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Burning Spear. They sang not only about freedom and justice, but about Haile Selassie as a spiritual king. Marley's song, War, built directly from Selassie's UN speech, turned the emperor's words into scripture for a new generation. This mythic dimension is extraordinary. How many political leaders are worshipped as divine figures by millions halfway across the world? Very few. Haile Selassie became more than emperor. He became a messiah in the imagination of the African diaspora. Selassie's relationship with the myth, interestingly, Selassie himself never openly embraced or rejected the Rastafarian claim of his divinity. When he visited Jamaica in 1966, he was greeted by massive crowds of Rastafarians who filled the air with chants of Jah Rastafari. For them, it was the fulfillment of prophecy. Selassie did not declare himself divine, but neither did he denounce them. Instead, he treated them with respect, meeting leaders of the movement and listening to their voices. Some scholars argue this was a deliberate choice, to neither destroy the myth nor fully endorse it, allowing it to grow organically. This ambiguity only strengthened the myth. In silence, people projected their own hopes, their own needs, onto him. For Rastafarians, his refusal to deny divinity was confirmation enough. For Ethiopians, it allowed him to remain emperor without appearing blasphemous. Selassie became a canvas onto which the world painted its spiritual desires. Symbol of Africa's struggle beyond Rastafarianism, Selassie's myth also grew through politics. He was not only the Lion of Judah, he was the Lion of Africa. His resistance to Mussolini in the 1930s, his exile and triumphant return, and his leadership in the founding of the Organization of African Unity elevated him to near mythic status. To Africans under colonial rule, he was more than a king. He was proof that Africa had its own heroes, its own emperors, its own leaders capable of standing equal to Europe. Cartoons, posters, and speeches depicted him as a larger-than-life figure, Africa's elder, the embodiment of dignity and strength. For Pan-Africanists, invoking Selassie's name was a way of invoking Africa's sovereignty. His myth fused political resistance with spiritual pride. Myth versus reality. The criticisms, but myths always clash with reality. At home, Selassie's reign was not as golden as the legends suggested. While the world admired him as a divine king and African liberator, many Ethiopians lived in poverty. His modernization efforts did not reach everyone. Famines devastated the countryside. Political repression silenced opposition. When he was overthrown in 1974 by a Marxist military junta, the myth of Selassie collided with harsh realities. His critics called him autocratic, disconnected from the suffering of ordinary Ethiopians, more concerned with his international image than domestic needs. This duality deepens the myth. For some, the fall of Selassie proves he was human, flawed, even failed. For others, his overthrow was the betrayal of a prophet by his own people, another Christ-like suffering that reinforced his divinity in the Rastafarian imagination. Myth in modern culture, even after his death, Selassie's myth refuses to fade. Rastafarian communities around the world continue to venerate him. His speeches are quoted in reggae songs and activist circles. His image appears on murals, posters, and flags as a symbol of black pride and resistance. In Ethiopia, the myth is more complicated. Some remember him as the emperor who modernized their nation and defended independence. Others remember the poverty and oppression of his rule. Yet even his critics cannot erase his symbolic stature. His face still adorns artworks, his legacy still sparks debate, his name still commands recognition. And globally, Selassie's myth has become part of a universal language of resistance. When Bob Marley sang, "Until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited," he was quoting Selassie. But in the popular imagination, it became the voice of humanity itself. The power of myth. So what does the myth of Haile Selassie teach us? It shows us that leaders are never remembered only for what they did. They are remembered for what they symbolized. For Rastafarians, Selassie symbolized divine redemption. For Pan-Africanists, he symbolized dignity and independence. For Ethiopians, he symbolized both progress and controversy. For the world, he symbolized resistance against tyranny. The myth of Haile Selassie is not one story, but many. It is sacred and political, spiritual and historical. And in that multiplicity lies its power. He became a legend because he was many things to many people, a mirror reflecting the needs and dreams of entire communities. Haile Selassie's modern legacies are never static. They evolve with time, shaped by memory, politics, and culture. Few figures embody this better than Haile Selassie, Ethiopia's Lion of Judah. Decades after his death, his legacy is still alive, in monuments and music, in political debates and spiritual devotion, in Ethiopia and across the globe. Yet it is a legacy filled with contradictions. To some, he is a liberator and visionary. To others, a failed emperor. And to millions, a divine figure whose spirit still walks among us. In the 21st century, Haile Selassie's modern legacy is a battlefield of memory, where myth, history, and critique collide. Selassie in Ethiopia today. Within Ethiopia, Selassie's legacy is deeply contested. For many, he remains a national hero, the emperor who defended Ethiopia from colonization, who modernized the state, who gave their nation dignity in the face of foreign empires. Statues of him still stand in Addis Ababa, and his name is still invoked as a symbol of Ethiopian pride. Yet others remember him differently. They recall his monarchy as rigid, his government as elitist, and his failure to address poverty and famine as unforgivable. In 1974, his overthrow by the Derg military regime was celebrated by many Ethiopians who felt betrayed by his long reign. The Derg tried to erase his legacy, but they could not erase his image from the Ethiopian imagination. Today, younger generations debate him openly. Some see him as the father of Ethiopia's modern identity, while others see him as a symbol of inequality. His modern legacy in Ethiopia is therefore not one voice, but many. He is pride and pain, progress and failure, inseparable from the contradictions of Ethiopian history itself. A Pan-African elder across Africa, Haile Selassie's legacy is steadier. He is remembered as one of the founding fathers of Pan-Africanism. His leadership in establishing the Organization of African Unity in 1963 remains a milestone in the continent's journey toward unity. Modern African Union leaders still meet in Addis Ababa, in the same city where Selassie hosted that founding gathering. For them, he is not simply Ethiopia's emperor, but Africa's elder statesman, a leader who believed deeply in the necessity of continental solidarity. In speeches at AU summits, his words are often quoted. His vision of African independence, dignity, and self-reliance continues to resonate, even as Africa struggles with new challenges. His modern legacy here is clear. He is remembered as the emperor who gave Africa a voice when the world tried to silence it. The Rastafarian faith and global culture, Selassie's modern legacy also lives vibrantly through the Rastafarian movement, which has only grown in global reach since his death. To Rastafarians, Haile Selassie is not just history. He is eternal. They continue to revere him as Jah Rastafari, the divine King of Kings, the Messiah who embodies spiritual freedom for Black people everywhere. Rastafarians worldwide still gather to celebrate the anniversaries of his coronation and his visit to Jamaica. Reggae music continues to spread his name, with Bob Marley, Burning Spear, and others immortalizing him in lyrics that echo across generations. Even as Ethiopia debates his legacy as emperor, the global cultural imagination celebrates him as a symbol of dignity, liberation, and spiritual truth. In murals, flags, and songs, Haile Selassie's image endures, reminding the world that his myth is as powerful as his history. Criticism and reassessment, but modern legacies are never only praise. Haile Selassie is also remembered critically. Scholars point out his failures to address Ethiopia's famines, especially in Wollo in the early 1970s, where hundreds of thousands died. His critics argue that he was more concerned with international image than with the plight of his people. Others highlight the authoritarian nature of his monarchy. Despite introducing a constitution, Ethiopia under Selassie remained a society of vast inequality, with feudal structures intact and democratic freedoms limited. His long rule, critics say, symbolized stagnation as much as progress. These criticisms matter because they humanize his legacy. They remind us that he was not a flawless saint, but a leader navigating impossible contradictions. His greatness abroad was sometimes mirrored by failures at home, and in recognizing both, we see the full complexity of his modern legacy. Memory and popular imagination. Haile Selassie's modern legacy also thrives in popular imagination. His speeches, especially those delivered at the League of Nations and the United Nations, are quoted as timeless calls for justice. His image as the Lion of Judah appears on posters, T-shirts, and album covers. Through reggae, his legacy is immortalized in culture. Songs like Bob Marley's War continue to inspire activists, linking Selassie's words to struggles against racism, inequality, and oppression worldwide. His influence is not confined to Ethiopia or Africa. It lives wherever music, culture, and spirituality carry his name. In this way, Selassie has transcended history. He has become a global icon, a cultural archetype, remembered not only for what he did but for what he symbolizes. Lessons for today's world. So what does Haile Selassie's modern legacy teach us? The power of voice. Selassie's speeches remind us that small nations and marginalized peoples can influence the world with courage and clarity. His words at Geneva in 1936 and at the UN in 1963 remain lessons in moral leadership. The complexity of leadership. His legacy teaches us that leaders are human, capable of greatness and failure in equal measure. To revere him as flawless is myth. To dismiss him as failure is injustice. His truth lies in the balance. The endurance of symbols. Haile Selassie shows us that leaders do not belong only to their nations. They can become symbols for entire movements, faiths, and generations. His role in Rastafarianism proves that leadership can transcend politics to touch the spiritual. Africa's unfinished struggle. His dream of African unity and dignity remains unfinished. Modern Africa still grapples with the challenges he warned of: dependency, division, and inequality. His legacy is a reminder that the struggle continues. Haile Selassie's modern legacy is one of paradox. He is celebrated as a Pan-African elder, revered as a messiah, criticized as an emperor, and remembered as a cultural icon. Few leaders embody such diversity of memory. In Ethiopia, his name sparks debate. In Africa, it inspires pride. In Jamaica and beyond, it evokes worship. In the world's imagination, it symbolizes defiance against oppression. The Lion of Judah lives on not because he was perfect, but because he was unforgettable. His influence, myth, and legacy are intertwined, ensuring that even decades after his death, his name still resonates wherever people speak of freedom, dignity, and justice. Haile Selassie is history. He is myth. He is symbol. And in the 21st century, he remains a reminder that leadership is not just about power. It is about the stories we leave behind.